Looks like we're already recording.
You'll have to edit this part out.
What's in that cup, Ladner?
He said, hmm?
Good morning, Jake.
Hi guys, how are you?
Morning.
Doing well.
Very exciting.
So, yeah, after I'm first going to introduce, thank the sponsors, and then I'm going to throw it to you, okay? And then Emily Ann after that. So
That's great. You guys all look so chipper. I love it.
got about a minute to go. All right, it's 8 o'clock. Good morning and thank you for joining us. My name is Gary Dorado and I'm the interim editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and I will be moderating this morning scoop. Now, I know for most of you who tune into our morning scoops, you're used to seeing Luigi Del Puerto, but he's moved on to new employment in Denver and we wish him well. And I'm happy to be sitting in this seat. Today, our panel will be talking about K-12 transportation. And it's not going to be just about school buses, although they're going to play a big part of it. But before we get into the discussion, I want to thank our sponsors of today's morning scoop. The Arizona Charter School Association, a nonprofit membership and professional organization that advocates and strengthens the autonomy, equity, and quality of Arizona's diverse public charter schools. Our other sponsor is A for Arizona, which aspires to a system where all students have access to a high-quality school and classroom proximate to them, including great virtual learning environments. So at this point, I'd like to please allow me to introduce Jake Logan. He's the president and CEO of the Arizona Charter Schools Association, for just a few words about the organization and why they're sponsoring today's discussion.
Gary, thanks so much. Thanks for hosting this and allowing us a chance to talk through this a little bit further. I also want to thank A for Arizona. They are great partners on this particular project and a lot of things, and we're very excited to have this discussion today. As Gary, you noted, we serve or we represent the majority of the charter schools in the state, which accompanies about 21% of kids in K-12, public K-12. But I think what's more telling will help this conversation is when you look at Arizona writ large, particularly Maricopa County, you have about half the students that use school choice one way or the other, would defined as going to somewhere other than their district school. And so we feel like transportation is a really critical component to making that system work. I'm excited to hear the panelists today, and I just want to thank you again, Gary, for hosting, and for Emily Ann and all her team and leadership, and Janelle and the whole group here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. And at this point, let me introduce Emily Ann Gullickson. She's the CEO and founder for A for Arizona. And so she can also give a few words on her organization and why they're sponsoring today's discussion.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Jake. Great to collaborate on this. Transportation barriers have been real for a long time for many families, and we all know a choice is not a choice if you can't get there. And the exciting news is that Arizona has a lot of entrepreneurial school leaders, community members, entrepreneurs who are really coming to the table with bold ideas on how to solve these long-time ingrained barriers and problems. And there's a lot of options now on the table about how we can rethink and modernize the way we approach K-12 student transportation. So thrilled to be here on the panel with these amazing community leaders.
Thank you, Emily Ann, and thank you, Jake, for both of you for sponsoring this discussion. We've got a great panel and a great subject, and I'd like to remind the audience that they can submit questions to the panelists, and we encourage it. So joining us is Matthew Ladner. He's the director of the Arizona Center for Student Opportunity at Arizona Charter Schools Association and serves as executive editor of the blog Reimagine Ed. Ladner's written numerous studies on school choice, charter schools, and special education reform. He's testified before Congress, state legislatures, and the United States Commission of Civil Rights. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and received a master's degree and PhD in political science from the University of Houston. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning.
Good morning. And as you've already met Emily Ann Gullickson, the CEO and founder of A for Arizona. And she's also the president and founder of Great Leaders Strong Schools, the political advocacy sister organization to A for Arizona. She brings a unique background of executive advocacy, legal, and teaching experience here in Phoenix as a Teach for America alumna. Emily Ann was recognized this year by the Arizona Capital Times as Leader of the Year in Education, Best Activist, one of the best political rising stars in 2020, and an inaugural Woman Achievers of Arizona nonprofit leader and breakout in 2019. Nationally, she's recognized this year by the Policy Innovators and Education Network as Breakout Advocate of the Year finalist, and her work in transportation reform led to recognition as a Game Changer Policy of the Year. Good morning, Emily Ann.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
And our, our third panelist is Representative Shawna Pollock. Representative Pollock is no stranger to the inner workings of local, state, and federal government. She was elected to her first term to the Arizona House of Representatives, representing Legislative District 20 in November 2018, and she's currently running for Secretary of State. But long before that, she worked with legislators at the New York State Assembly and worked in a public high school in New York City, where it sparked her passion for helping families access better educational opportunities. She's also worked at the Capitol Hill for U.S. Senator Rick Santorum and as a policy researcher at the Heritage Foundation on the No Excuses, Lessons from 21 High-Performing, High-Poverty Schools Civil Society Project. And after moving to Arizona in 2001, Pollock successfully balanced motherhood and working from home while consulting for the Arizona Charter School Association, the Goldwater Institute, the Alliance for School Choice, and the Arizona School Choice Trust. And she lives with her family in Phoenix with their 3 greyhounds. Good morning, Representative Pollock.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on this prestigious panel.
Thank you. And our fourth panelist is Janelle Wood. She's the founder of Black Mothers Forum. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in economics from Arizona State University in 1989 and her Master's of Arts degree in biblical leadership from Phoenix Seminary in 2005. She's always had a heart for those in need and a passion to build up the people within her community. Janelle's passion is to ensure all Black children have the opportunity to live out their God-given purpose, free from the threat of systems, laws, policies, procedures, and practices that limit and control the movement of their Black bodies. Janelle is the founder, president of the Black Mothers Forum Incorporated, founded in August 2016, a nonprofit organization of Black mothers who have come together to end the bloodshed in the Black community, dismantle the school to prison pipeline, and restore the strength, dignity, and hope of the Black community. She was one of the Phoenix 2019 MLK Junior Living the Dream awardees. And she currently serves on numerous civic committees, including Black Mothers Forum Super Saturdays School, Black Mothers Forum Micro Schools, which opened in January of 2021. And she's co-author of ABCs of Influence, released in 2020, and she serves on the Arizona State Board for Charter Schools. Welcome, Janelle.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's get the ball rolling and start with Matt. I read your white paper last night entitled, "Oh, the Places We'll Go, the Case for Improving the Equity Through Modernization of Arizona K-12 Transportation." And that contends that the yellow school bus system of transporting kids to school is obsolete. Can you explain to us how it's obsolete and how it got that way?
Yeah, well, thank you, Gary. I mean, I think there's three basic points that the paper tries to make. Number one is that school transport is a very big equity issue, right? We illustrate this in the paper by imagining that you're a family that lives at the address in the Arizona Capitol, right there in downtown Phoenix. And we basically say, okay, so you're living at the Capitol, you've got a 7th grade student. How many school options do you have, right? If you can transport your child 6 miles round trip, which is not a lot, but that's a lot for many. You have 19 different schools you can choose between: public schools, district, and charter. If you're relying on the school bus system, that system is still mostly designed to take you to one of those 19 schools, right? So there's sort of a tyranny of distance involved here. If you're a family that doesn't own an automobile or whose work schedule doesn't permit you to do student transport on your own, you're paying into a system that is not doing much to serve you. Number two, second big point from the paper, is that the ridership in district buses in Arizona was in decline even before COVID-19 came around. The national and the state figures on this differ a little bit in detail, but they are clear about the direction, which is ridership went down between 2012 and 2019. Nationwide, that's about 33% of students ride on district buses to get to school. And in Arizona in 2019, so before COVID-19, that was down to 23%. So ridership in yellow buses is going down while costs continue to go up, okay? Finally, and the most important point, I think, is there's no going back. What basically happened before the pandemic was a change in the job market for people that own or are holders of commercial driver's licenses, which are required to drive yellow school buses. There are firms, private firms like Amazon, Instacart, FedEx, and others who want to hire people who have commercial driver's licenses. They will pay them, they will employ them full time. They will give them medical benefits and 401ks and all that sort of thing. And so our districts, as we got into the habit of having things delivered to our houses, right, the market for people who have a CDL changed, gradually but steadily, right? And then, the pandemic was sort of the coup de grace. The schools closed. There was a sudden shock in demand for even more delivery drivers, right? And probably most problematically of all, amongst people who don't want to drive full time, right? Who are typically maybe retirees. A lot of these people, anecdotally from talking to people, got scared away from driving on buses because of COVID-19 itself, right? If you're over the age of 65, the idea of getting on a bus with a bunch of kids who weren't even eligible to get a vaccine yet was somewhat daunting. So when you add all of this up, what we have is a permanent change. This is not just a bump in the road, so to speak, but a permanent change in the way these things work. These problems are nationwide. The governor of Massachusetts actually called out the National Guard to start driving school buses there. Especially when you factor in what Jake mentioned, which is the fact that a majority of students within the Phoenix area are attending this school other than their own district school, right? We are going to have to have a much more sort of multimodal, and I think we're going to have to basically flood the zone with solutions, because neither I nor I think anyone on this panel is calling for eliminating yellow school buses. We still need them, but we also are going to have to take pretty strong action to sort of supplement them with a variety of other solutions, because they alone will never be equal to the task we're assigning to them.
And so that's how we got here. So let's talk about where we're going. Now, Emily Ann might have something to say about that, because she's got some news to break here today. So you did mention in your paper, Matt, about the transportation modernization grants. So Emily, can you tell us about your organization's role in those and what those grants mean? And talk a little bit about the grants and what they mean to the students and the parents of Arizona.
Absolutely. So part of this past legislative session, the state legislature created the Arizona Transportation Modernization Grants, and we were selected through a competitive bid process by the Department of Administration to oversee this $10 million grant program. And Governor Ducey wanted to champion more innovation in K-12. So he matched that with federal stimulus monies. And so we just wrapped up the first cycle. A shout out to some of the vetting committee members who put in countless hours to oversee all of the 71 initial applications. And yesterday, we just announced the very first cycle. There are 24 awardees. And what's really great is they really represent the state's geographic density, all the different kinds of school models that are underway, and also our entrepreneurial community partners. Of those finalists, 40%, over 40% were from rural and remote communities, which is so important to flag. Like, innovation does not just happen in the greater Phoenix metro. And there's just a lot of representation there from all the different models. And most of the final awardees really represent either solutions targeting underserved student populations or communities that really were driving at how do we think outside the box and add, as Dr. Ladner said, new approaches to the way that we're taking on transportation.
Yeah, and I noticed there was, a pretty good cross-section of awardees. You had your traditional school districts, charter schools, and what were tell me some of the more innovative ideas that you awarded?
Yeah, so as you noted, there were public charters, public districts. We had the city of Chandler really led the way on microtransit. And then there were also some great nonprofits and entrepreneurs there. So we had ranging from direct to family grants. A lot of folks were really flipping into high efficiency vehicles, electric, solar charging, even in the rural communities, which is great. Like, how do we cut costs by really having more efficient vehicles instead of just diesel? A lot of neat micro transit solutions, recognizing the value of small vans where the drivers cost 3 to 4 times less than the usual CDL drivers that Dr. Ladner referenced. And we loved seeing some of the collaborative approaches. 2 of the Boys and Girls Clubs partnered up with schools in Bisbee and Vista College Prep. And what's neat about that is they're thinking outside the box on here's a safe and supportive environment where kids and families utilize the space before and or after school. How can we lean in and be collaborative partners? We have drivers, we have vehicles, right? Can we rethink that last mile that schools are responsible for? And also looking at, how to collaborate and think outside the box on that residential pickup so that it doesn't all fall onto the schools by themselves. So those are just a few samples.
So could we see a future where schools, organizations and so forth have fleets of little vans, maybe yellow, instead of the big school bus?
Larry, I think the big takeaway from our perspective is that some of the really thoughtful proposals leaned into having multiple options on the table, right? So instead of doing that usual pendulum swing that we do in K-12, unfortunately, so often, I think that some of the best ones like Chin Lee and Crane really put together multiple options on the table because they're listening to unique subsets of families, right? So in Crane, for example, they have 65 families in the military base that they needed to target a viable solution there, which looked different than some of the students who live closer to some of their campuses. And so I think that that holistic approach, recognizing that how do we empower you to sustain multiple options instead of that knee-jerk reaction of going from yellow bus to something else. I think that the bus will play a key role, but we also are trying to meet the other 40, 60, 80% of families that currently have been underserved or left on their own.
So many of these ideas are percolating up from, I don't want to say the bottom, but from the grassroots, the families themselves.
Yeah, the best proposals talked about parent surveys, parent engagement, where they really leaned into community members. They invited entrepreneurs to the table and said, like, we don't want to do this alone, but out of urgency and need because of driver shortages, others because they finally had permission to really try something. A lot of them had been salivating on some of these ideas for a while, and now they finally had the runway and space to go forth and lean in and execute.
Okay, so one of the awardees of that was Black Mothers Forum, if I'm correct. And so Janelle, tell us about the Black Mothers Forum's interest in school transportation and how you approach school transportation.
Well, thank you so much. And, I always appreciate working with people who like to think outside the box. We've had an opportunity as Black Mothers Forum to sit down and really think about the systems that have been in place that for our children and have created some unsafe and unsupported environments. And so our whole goal is to create those safe and supportive learning environments. And that part of that is making sure our children have access to those particular environments. And with our micro schools that we launched in January, one of the things that we found out is that we had some parents who were willing to drive in 45 minutes to and from our micro schools to make sure their child was safe. Now, after a while, that time that it took that parent to come back and forth, that started to wear on her. And I remember her talking to me about, is there a way for you to provide transportation for my child to get back and forth to your South Mountain campus from Buckeye? She's in Buckeye, willing to come all the way from Buckeye to South Phoenix in order to have a safe space for her son to be in. And she, unfortunately, this past year was not able to keep him in our schools. You know why? Because she could not continue to endure that 45-minute to and from school drive, which was unfortunate for her son because he is missing out on what he enjoyed so much about being in our micro schools, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to do was find a way to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And when this opportunity came up with Emily, with the A for Arizona and Emily Ann talking to me about it, the thing that we came up with is, here I had a parent who was willing to drive that drive. Well, what if we sweeten the pot for her and allowed her to become something like a parent driver? And that's what our idea was to look at helping parents share in this work of getting students to and from school. She had other children in her community that would have loved to have been in her SUV, and she would have brought those children into a safer space. But many of our parents, especially in our underserved communities, need supplemental income. And so one of the things that we talked about was putting together something like a Lyft app for our parents that are in these communities, give them an opportunity to be a part of the solution and to drive children from their community into the various schools so that they can have access to these type of smaller learning communities that many of our children need so desperately. And we are excited about that opportunity because it serves two purposes. Not only does it provide some supplemental income for families, but it also allows our communities to come together and make sure all the different children in the community get to the best environment for them so that they can thrive and be all, and you heard it in my bio, all that they were purposed here to be. So that is our passion, and that is why we're excited about this work. And we're always looking for creative ways to include our parents and include our community across the board to help Arizona's children get the education that they so desperately deserve and need so that we can thrive as a community and as a state.
So did I hear this correctly, that so the parent drivers are not going to just be volunteers, they're actually going to earn a little income from this as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's very promising, and that's definitely incentive for our parents to be a part of this work, and also have a safe person in the car with our children. Because a parent, like I did this, I was a Lyft driver for a season, and I worked the early shift. So I was the one that was on shift to take children to school. We had parents, single parents, putting their children in a Lyft car with me. And they would request me every day because why? Because I was a safe person for their child, and their child enjoyed being with me. That was another safe space and a supportive space on that way to school for that child. But that parent was paying a lot of money for Lyft. And so I wanted to create something. We wanted to create something where it wouldn't break the bank for the parent to get their child to school. There had to be another way. And this particular funding and the bill that passed allows certain stipends and grants for parents to use those dollars in a way to get their children to school. And so this is how we are looking to help pay for that, so those parents don't have to make those financial decisions that could potentially cause them not to pay rent or pay a bill just to get their child to school.
And one of the compelling elements there was that, they did their homework. They checked out all of the carpool hub apps across the country. And the reality is the prices are really high, especially if you're a smaller school system. And so one of their goals is, how do you develop this low cost, accessible platform that other public schools can then utilize themselves? So really recognizing like there must be a better way to think about this. Carpool is obviously not new, it's existed for a long time, but how do we make sure that it can lead to more accessibility for more students?
Yeah, I'd just add that 54% of students nationwide are getting to school in a privately owned vehicle. And that makes every single empty seat in one of those schools an opportunity to get a kid to school and to take another vehicle off the road.
Yeah, when I was a elementary school parent, I made sure that my 3 rows in my Honda Pilot were full, taking my kids and our neighbors who were attending the same charter school. Yes, it reduced a lot of other cars on the road, but I made sure that we all got there on time and obviously safely. We had a really great network, and I'm very proud that Janelle has figured out how to adapt to a growing system. There shouldn't be transit barriers for these kids that want to actually learn. We know a lot of kids right now, they have been staying home from school because of the lack of transportation. So innovative grants like the ones that A for Arizona brought to the legislature earlier this session, it's really a great solution. There's not a one size fits all model. When you look at how diverse Arizona is, and I can tell you, I've put 15,000 miles in my car in the last couple months. There are some really far back roads that school buses should not be on. And, if there's a parent that has an ATV to get the kid from one point to the next, and, you actually have maybe a rideshare meeting them at that point, you don't need to worry about the maintenance of those school buses breaking down. We always see on the front page of the Arizona Republic every few years of these buses that take kids, very few kids on a very large school bus, over an hour to get to school, and the roads that they're on. And most school buses are not equipped to handle those roads.
All right, well, as far, one last question about this idea of yours, Janelle. Have you started it yet? I know they were just granted the awards yesterday, but how far are you into it so far?
We are just at the app stage. So we're getting ready to get started to really talk about what that app looks like, how we create that. And again, like Emily Ann said, there are other rideshare apps out there. So we don't need to recreate the wheel, but we need to recreate this so that it is actually affordable for our families that we want to serve. So those are the things that we'll be looking at. So we're at the beginning stages of that portion of it. But again, there's already rideshare apps out there. It's just us identifying bits and pieces that are going to work to fit our specific needs.
Do you have a goal on when you want to start doing this?
as soon as possible. We'd
Yeah.
like to get going because we have students and parents that are requesting access to our micro schools, and we are trying to move as quickly as possible to provide them with that access with the transportation. So this is a should have happened yesterday type of move. We are moving with the swiftness to get this done.
And it sounds like once you're done with this webinar, you'll probably be jumping on that right away. So, Representative Pollock, we spoke yesterday, and you wanted to talk a little bit about the annual Auditor General's report on classroom versus administrative spending, and home in on the transportation category. What can we take from these annual reports, and I guess in context of today's discussion and innovation?
Well, whenever you see that we spend about on average $2,000 a kid to get them to and from school, that just seems astronomical to me, that we're investing $2,000 to get a kid to and from school, knowing that, my own school district, there are delays and sometimes people are not even getting picked up in the morning. Relying on potential apps, rideshare programs, different innovative hubs that are being discussed this morning. We can move away from that. I mean, the cost of gasoline's up over 40% this year so far. And, it's really hitting the family's pocketbook. But if they're able to participate in, say, what Janelle Woods is working on, they can obviously get paid to drive a few kids to school, reduce the cost of their gasoline receipt at the pump, but making sure that the kids are getting to school safely. I worked in a public high school back in New York City back in the 1990s. And obviously New York City is the biggest public school system in the entire country. And it feeds from 5 different boroughs. And those kids would be on a bus and taking the subway, for an hour and a half, 2 hours each way to get to school. And as Janelle talked about earlier, I mean, some of those kids had to deal with getting approached by gangs or asking the kids to sell drugs. So, whenever you have a safe environment to get the kids to and from school, and you see that, you're saving money at the end of the day, I can tell you, I was bullied on my school bus every single year. I went to a very suburban school back outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I've loved the fact that I was able to drive my kids to and from school. I knew that they weren't going to get bullied on the bus. They weren't going to get beat up at the bus stop like they tried to beat me up a couple of different times. So for me, the safety measure is huge. And, you don't need to have all of those extra aspects being fed into a kid before they actually get to school in the morning. And at the end of the day, obviously.
So, Matt, you mentioned earlier today that your money is on 15% is going to be the ridership in the next year or so?
It was down to 23%. In 2019, the media has been full of reports of canceled routes. Of one of them showed a field of yellow buses in the morning that just didn't have riders. So yeah, I mean, I would guess it's down to 15. But just because I happen to remember the numbers that Representative Pollock mentioned. The statewide, the system was spending $191 million, across all districts in 2012, and that went up to $380 million by 2019, according to the Auditor General report. Even as the number of students riding the buses continued to decline. So I don't think this is the district's fault, but it is all of our problems, right? And the bottom line, my bottom line is that we're going to have to figure out every way possible to transport kids that don't involve a CDL holder, right? It's not an option. It's something we're going to have to do.
Okay, and I guess how long has this been building up to this point? Is this pretty recent phenomena, or has this been going on, just building up to, these numbers just over the years?
Yeah, Gary, you may remember the Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. One character asked another character, he said, "How did you go bankrupt?" And the guy said, 2 ways: gradually and then suddenly, right? The gradual part is what I described to you earlier, right? The 2012 to 2019 numbers where they gradually declining. The pandemic has been the sudden part. We don't have the data on that yet, but it can't be anything but bad. So, you know, we have a system as of 2019 that everybody was paying into, that less than a quarter of students were utilizing. And so, you know, we can't have a transportation system that spends $380 million on 23% of the kids and, you know, very little on the rest, right? It's a little too Flintstones, and we needed to be a little more Jetsons.
Now this might be, you know, really looking into the crystal ball, but you know, if all these things that, you know, all these innovations and so forth come to pass, what do you think the cost will be? You know, I mean, right now, what is it, 2,000 per kid? Do you think it'll dramatically decrease or stay the same, just different ways of getting it done?
I'll jump
Anybody?
in here. So some of the proposals were specifically targeting efficiency solutions, enhanced technology to leverage heat maps, better driving efficiencies. And so part of the goal here wasn't just innovation, but that the theme of the modernization side, right, was some of the proposals said, here's what our budget is now. We think we can cut it in half. Here's how much we're spending now. We think by adding these additional options, we can actually decrease ridership costs. And so some of the folks that flipped longstanding old diesel buses into electric with solar solutions and leveraging how they can utilize new fleets like that, or electric vans, are definitely seeing short-term and long-term how much money they're going to save from maintenance costs alone. And so I think that's important. We're looking to capture those best practices that are learned from this initial cycle of awardees and be able to show the legislature, other schools, you know, here's where they started, here's where they were at, even within 6 months. And by next December, like how far did they go in just 1 year, and what can we learn from that so that we can double down on what's working?
All right. And, you know, where do you know, where does it end, I guess? You know, where do we go from here as far as all this innovation and so forth?
Well, I would love to get to a point where we have an app that we're relying on and we can tell a driver ahead of time where the kids are going to be. And they're obviously background checked, and, you know, they're going to get to school safely and on time. I mean, it's 2021. Any school district that's still dealing with all of these contracts associated with maintaining a bus fleet, I mean, they're definitely not in the right mindset at this point, in my opinion. You have different rideshare vans that have been out there for, I don't know, at least a decade, who have figured out how to get things right. Sometimes a parent will have to drop off their kid at a central location on the way to work. That obviously doesn't work for everybody, but the idea that you have an app that can actually get a kid to and from school, but you also, seeing what happened in the pandemic last year, I'm wondering if that's going to really change our education model moving forward. Parents now understand that you don't have to be sitting in a classroom all day. You can actually do some classes online, you know, just blowing up the whole system and making sure that kids can potentially on the weekend, you know, participate in a sport. I personally think this is just the start of the beginning of more innovation, not just transportation, but just looking at the whole entire model as it sits. You know, whenever you think of rural Arizona and how long it takes for a kid to get to school, do they really need to be on a school bus going to school every single day when they could potentially do some of their work at home? You know, last year, a lot of kids figured that out. Wasn't the best situation for everybody. But I'm looking at this model as potentially changing the way that we educate our kids too.
Can somebody speak to how, you know, like I said, you know, I think a lot of people take it for granted that they can get their kids to school. You know, some of us have grown up, you know, we either walked to school or had, you know, rode the bus, you know, the yellow bus. and I think you touched on this a little bit in your paper, Matt, how does, transportation correlate to school performance and learning?
Yeah, there's a lot of research that show, for instance, that students that do open enrollment do enjoy academic and social benefits. I saw a study from Ohio about this recently, and it found that not only were there benefits, the biggest beneficiaries of open enrollment in Ohio were African American students. And the sad thing about that is that all the big urban districts in Ohio are surrounded by suburban districts that will not participate in open enrollment. I'm very happy to say that Arizona is kind of the opposite of that. Almost all of our districts participate in open enrollment. It's a great credit to them. And it's one of the reasons that Arizona had, before the pandemic, we had the highest rate of academic growth in the country. That's not to say we have the highest test scores. That's different, okay? Mm-hmm. It is to say that Arizona students learned more per year in school than any other state in the country. So, we've come a long way, but I would say that transportation has been a longstanding, unaddressed equity issue. I exercise choice in the education of my children. My children initially, my two sons initially went to an open enrollment district school within the same district. We were not allowed to ride the bus, right? I could have walked my sons to the bus, and then they could have gone to their elementary school, but that district policy did not allow that, right? It was that was kind of understood that yes, you can do open enrollment, but you are on your own for getting them to school. And of course, that means that everyone kind of jams up there in the morning in a long line of cars dropping their kids off, right? When you step back and kind of think about that for a moment, though, that doesn't make any sense because I paid my transportation and property tax just like everyone else. And so on what basis would I be excluded from riding the bus? That's a particular district issue from long ago. So, but it's still with us a lot of ways. So if we can improve our transportation system, we will be opening up a world of opportunity for low-income parents, for parents whose family schedule does not permit them to drive their students around. The number of schools that they'll have to choose between, the magic of what is going on. And I believe the reason why Arizona is leading the nation in academic growth, or at least we were before the pandemic, is because our families have the opportunity to match the particular needs of and interests and aspirations of their child to a set of specialized schools, right? But if you can't get to those schools, you're kind of like locked out of them, and they're sort of tantalizingly, so close and yet so far away. So I'm very optimistic that there are many different ways. I don't know that we'll ever have a perfect transportation system, but we're on our way to having one that is much more equitable and serves everyone, or at least closer to everyone, rather than what we have now, which is a system that focuses almost all of its resources on a relatively small percentage of students.
Janelle, before we went on the air, we were talking about how there's charter schools in her area, but they all have waiting lists. I mean, is the demand for school choice and charter schools or going to another district, is that kind of driving or making the transportation problem worse?
I believe, like I said earlier, before we got on the call, we have families who have opted to go with the charter school in their area. Right. Unfortunately, they've been met at times with there is not a seat available, or if they want to go to another school district, perhaps they're finding that there may not be a seat available in that district. So they're not able to get that child in that school. And at times they find themselves having to stay where they're at until they can get that opportunity. Now, if they had, and then some of our parents, and I was saying, some of our parents have varied work schedules. And so with that also being the case, they may not be able to get their child to school on time because they're working a third shift that gets them home at a later time. And so having access to transportation, reliable transportation, where they know someone, especially with what we're looking to do, that there's going to be another parent in that space to help their child get to the school that they want their child to go to. That's just a big relief. And they may not be able to do it within their district. They may have to go outside of that several miles, but at least they can, the parent has some sense of comfort that their child is where they need to be. And so just this particular opportunity to vary the transportation options is huge for our community. And once our community understands the great benefits of this type of innovative transportation grants that we're getting and these dollars, they're going to fully take advantage of it. I believe they will, but right now it's just getting the word out and making sure that people understand that they do have these options. But I was explaining earlier, and I believe Representative Pollock brought it up, when my son was in school, the district that we live in, while we love the area, the school district was not going to be compatible for our son because we knew what he needed. And we had to put him on a city bus to send him to several districts away to get to another public school. And the day he came home and told me that a pimp approached him and asked him what he wanted to do and if he wanted to make some extra money, and he was in the 7th grade, that was unacceptable. No way. And we had to find another way to get him to the school that we wanted him to be at. That required some additional sacrifices on our part. And thankfully, we were able to make them. But how many families do not have that option, and they have to have their children run the risk of being approached by individuals in the community that don't mean them any good and are not there to make sure that they further their education? That is what many of our children face on a daily basis. And it's not right. It's not fair. They don't deserve it. Because according to the Arizona Constitution, every child here is supposed to be afforded a quality education. But if they can't get to it, now we're failing them, even in our own laws. So,
what are some of the, anybody can answer this, but, as far as, the next step, next legislative session, next group of ideas or whatever, what's coming next as far as, the innovation for K-12 transportation?
Well, I'll jump in that one of the questions we ask all of the applicants was about any policies, rules, regulation barriers that are in their way from either implementing or sustaining their transit options. And we certainly have some additional work to do. I saw in the chat some questions about insurance. We're researching now about some legislative cover that insurers may need in order to actually support options outside of just the yellow school bus. We obviously, like, student safety is a paramount concern and importance. And so we have definitely been engaged with some folks on how do we make sure that these options, if successful, can also be sustained and maintained, and that folks aren't intimidated from driving at solutions that parents and school leaders want and that are working for kids.
Can these ideas extend to, extracurricular activities, school sports, the kids, they jump on the school bus to go, play away games and so forth. Is there something in there for extracurricular activities as well, as far as school transportation?
I'll jump in fast and then kick it. I see Ladner's pondering. So last year, the legislature passed bipartisan legislation, House Bill 2862, around seat time flexibility and innovation. And it empowers schools, as Representative Pollock noted, to rethink where, when, and how learning occurs. It's not a mandate. those schools or systems that want to opt in to those additional regulatory flexibilities can. And so a lot of the applicants and some of the final awardees noted that all students would not be attending school on the same bell schedule moving forward, because they're looking at pursuing or already have committed to leveraging and opting in to being a system utilizing the 2862 flexibility. So why does that matter, Gary? Well, because folks are needing to think differently about shuttling students to learning hubs or career and technical apprenticeships or additional coursework that might be occurring not at that physical classroom on that same campus. And so that's why you saw some of the proposals that were really driving at realizing that students might be taking a night class now, right? And so how do we make sure that we're accommodating and students aren't left out of those rigorous course options just because of transportation barriers?
And I can attest, my daughter, she was supposed to take a higher level math class, and they said, we don't have the transportation to get her to a different campus. And to me, I said, well, she can get on an Uber. And they're like, well, we can't really support that, even though it would be on my side of liability. So, the fact moving forward, we want to make sure that we don't have these transit barriers, but at the same time, we need to make sure that these kids are being able to be challenged, whatever school they decide to opt into. And, I love the fact that there are so many different options for our children to potentially do better. You have the community college access, can tap into Westmec, EVIT. Not every kid learns the same. So if we could actually pick and choose potentially on an app saying, this is what our ideal curriculum looks for our kid, and it meets the state requirements to graduate, why are we not looking at that?
Yeah, I think in the paper, Gary, I noted some research that was done in Minneapolis, and they had a pilot program there in 2013 to give municipal bus passes to high school students. And of course, that's not every solution for every kid at all, but they did a formal academic evaluation of it, and they found that truancy went down, attendance went up, and in part, extracurriculars were better served. Kids made it to school more often because they had more than one shot at getting on the bus, right? And it was okay to stay after school to do extracurricular things. But to your broader point about kind of what's next, I think that transportation modernization is actually just a piece of a broader thing that we need to confront in Arizona, which is school finance reform generally. The last time our legislature revamped the school funding formula was back in 1980. And then they did a great job of it, by the way. They equalized funding between pupils. They statewide, they kept the high spenders high, but then brought up the bottom. And in a lot of ways, I think what they did back in 1980 set the stage for what came later. It really wasn't until after about 2009 where Arizona really started to see this academic improvement. And I think it was enabled by what was done in the past. But Gary, I wrote a piece for your paper a while back, earlier this year, basically, saying that the last time we did this, it was the best-selling car in America was an Oldsmobile Cutlass, and that was a pretty sweet ride back in 1980. But it's kind of time to go back to the drawing board. Modernizing transportation is an important part of a bigger thing, which is to modernize the entire way we fund schools. Okay,
yeah, and I remember that. I don't remember if you gave me the picture of the 1980 Cutlass or I had to find one, but I remember that now. So we've got some questions from the audience, and they also had some discussion amongst themselves, it looks like. And so how are the insurance considerations going to be handled, in the modernization of transportation?
I guess I'll say, so some insurers are not excited, and other awardees took into account additional insurance costs and worked with their general counsel and insurers in developing their plan. So it's one of the things that we're researching along with other smarter people than myself and our team. And so we need thought partners in this, right? A lot of people don't like change. And so it takes some folks rolling up their sleeves and helping us to think about additional solutions. But awardees definitely had some thorough responses around student safety, insurance, protection for students and drivers, and looking at what that looks like and accounted for that in their total package as to how to account for adding additional options. And some of them are not currently necessarily covered under old plans. So some folks are having to look at other ways to make sure that there's coverage.
And that's what we're looking at. We know the Black Mothers Forum, what we were looking at is the different rideshare options, as well as looking at how Hop, Skip, and Drive, they actually handle their insurance of their drivers, as well as Uber and Lyft. So there's a lot of research going into that right now. So we have not left that out of our thought process. We are still in the thought process of that. But we, believe me, that is something we're definitely looking at, because we do not want our parents, drivers, to be in any way harmed, be disenfranchised from doing this work. And so we want to make sure that we cover the insurance and make sure that those costs are covered moving forward. And so we're looking at the most cost-effective way to do that, but it's definitely in our thought process moving forward.
And Emily Ann, you mentioned that if I heard you correctly, some of the insurers don't like this. What are some of their concerns?
Well, they are used to a one-size solution.
Okay.
And some of them have concerns about white fleet vehicles or vans, even smaller options. They cover for extracurriculars or sports, but not wanting to cover those for transit solutions to and from school, even where applicants can justify that geographic terrain or other circumstances that is a better, more viable solution for the students to not be in transit for 2 hours, or it's a safer road route for students than an 80-passenger bus. So again, when you lean into modernizing and innovating, right, we know that there are roadblocks. It's why schools haven't always been empowered to do this. And so we're wanting to collaborate and find viable solutions to ensure that schools can actually execute and deliver, because these ideas, again, came from communities, came from parents, came from local business thought partners. And so when something is that common sense and in demand, we've got to rethink the way that we approach that and make sure that it can get implemented properly.
Well, I can see future legislation when it comes to all that, and I'm sure that's going to be something that's going to be brought up at some point down at the legislature, trying to solve that problem. So got one more question, and I think you already answered this, Matt, but can you go over again some of the reasons why there's this bus driver shortage?
Yeah. First off, the market for people who hold a commercial driver's license has fundamentally changed over the last decade. There is way more competition for CDL holders, driving a school bus is a challenging job. It has strange hours, and it typically does not pay benefits. And none of those things are true if you want to go to work for Instacart or Amazon, right? Amazon and Instacart and getting stuff delivered to your front door is never going away, okay? And in fact, the pandemic just caused an enormous spike in demand for people that could do that kind of work. So when the schools closed, a lot of the people who are driving buses went to go work for those companies. A lot of them aren't coming back. And then the safety concerns with the virus itself have been very acute for older drivers. These are people that maybe weren't all that interested in working full-time as a delivery driver or doing full-time CDL type work. But they were often very reticent to get back into an enclosed space like that. So they retired, right? So it's not that districts can't do things; they are doing things. They're increasing pay, and they're trying sign-on bonuses and all these sort of things. But these are, ultimately we're up against a fundamental change in the market for people who can that hold CDLs, and we have to plan accordingly.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. And thank you to the panelists. We're closing in on an hour, and that's going to wrap up our conversation for today. And although from the sounds of it, this conversation is going to continue for, quite some time. And I would like to once again thank our sponsors, the Arizona Charter Schools Association and A for Arizona, and thank our panelists who took the early part of their very busy days to be with us and have this important discussion. And I would also like to remind our audience that we're going to be presenting another Morning Scoop on Thursday on apprenticeships. So we hope you'll join us then. I'm Gary Grotto with the Arizona Capital Times, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Nice to meet you.